up.
Billy will have to notify you.
Here. You can see more of my shirt now that I've pulled that down a little. Okay, so we are live on YouTube and the video should be active. You can just search Matinee Minutiae. Minutiae is Minutiae. Matinee Minutiae on YouTube. And today is a special episode, so we are just playing it up here.
Yeah, look at that shirt. It says The Strangers, and I see some like spooky faces on there, DJ. What was that movie?
It was a early 2000s film. I want to say it was 2004, and among the stars in it was the pop star Aerosmith's daughter, Liv Tyler. So this was shortly after she started doing films. The film that she'd done a few years before this was one with Tom Hanks called That Thing You Do.
Okay.
So, but it's just a horror movie about a young couple that is on the rocks, and they go to a cabin in the woods, and all sorts of things happen from there. So, shall I play our theme music, sir?
Let's get her underway.
Okay.
What do you get when you take a dash of the silver screen, a pinch of the golden oldies, and a smidgen of streaming? It's time for Matinee Minutiae with your host DJ and Toppy.
Greetings. This is Toppy Smelly reporting live from the Marionette Theater in Spud Flats, New York. I'm your host for this, our third live streaming episode of Matinee Minutiae here on the Univaz Network. I bid you welcome. In the seat next to me is my friend, fellow podcaster, creator, and star of Matinee Minutiae. Welcome, DJ Starsage.
Hey there. Hi there, folks. How are you doing this fine evening, Mr. Smelly?
I'm pretty good. I'm all up on the Halloween stuff. I'm eager, ready, and willing to be spooky this episode. How about you? How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm just slightly disappointed I couldn't find that Halloween candy that has the little black cats and the bats in it. They seem to
yeah.
put out this year.
Oh, that's a shame. I love those things.
All of our independent candy companies are disappearing, and maybe that's among them. But I digress. So we are here tonight because we have a love of movies and television. And when we last got together, we put that magician's coin in the machine, and we popped out a little piece of info for you on what we're going to watch today. And Toppy, if you will, please let our listeners know the hints that we gave out last episode for today's program.
Yeah. It's a 1932 movie starring Boris Karloff. And I think that was about it, wasn't it? Did we say more?
Well, since it's got Boris Karloff, I'd say there's a good chance it's probably a horror movie, right?
Well, yeah. Although some would say no, some would say yes. It may not reach the arena of horror, but it was certainly this movie, folks, I'm so into. And it sort of introduced so many of the tropes that would come later in so many horror movies over the years, right up to the present. You might say this movie started it all.
I'd say that's a pretty good lead there. So, normally, before we begin the program, we head on over for some refreshments where we give you a few more leads on what we're going to be talking about. So, Toppy, take it away.
All right. Well, okay.
So, our popcorn lady is here, and
Oh,
And she's going to be showing us a few things that have been laid out.
yeah.
These are a few more clues.
Yeah, okay. So right here, hi everyone. Uh, I'm Gertrude. I'm Gertie. They call me Gertie,
Thank
and I
you.
run I run the concession stand here. So the first thing I got here is a bowl of boiled potatoes. You see that?
Oh, yay! And they've even got the skins on them, just like I like them.
Yeah, it's lovely. Gertie, what else do you got there? Okay, so moving on. We got a great big Uh, uh, what do we have? It's oh
These look like these could be served in a martini.
well, yeah. There's lots of drinks. This this movie is all about people drinking as they get to know each other. You know what I mean? Like as people do. They socialize and booze comes into it. You know what
I,
I mean?
those look good. Let me have one of those pickled onions.
Oh, well, that's the other thing, DJ, is the other clue is a relish plate. That's what you're talking about. Yeah,
Mhm.
the relish plate. Which is what? Well, it's like pickles and pickled onions and bullshit ooh, and stuff like that.
And what's this box over here next to the rest of this here? That's not food. What is that?
Well, that's what well, I don't know. What would you say that is, DJ? I don't know. You
Well,
you tell me.
it looks like a box of matches.
Oh my God, that's true. Well, that's a good clue because, to be honest with you, there's a bit of a pyromaniac in this movie. Yeah, that's why I have the matches. Okay, good, goody. All right.
And you got this other thing here now. I know you have some hobbies, Gertie, but did you have to bring it into work here? I mean, there's a dollhouse here, but Toppy, did you notice something interesting about this dollhouse? There's a lot of furniture in it, but it's missing from some of the room.
Well, I think I know what you mean. There's no beds, DJ.
Oh,
There's no beds in that dollhouse.
well, that's not very nice for guests.
Yeah, well, that's another stupid clue for your audience. Do you need me anymore or can I leave?
Oh,
Oh.
go have your smoke break.
All right. Bye bye, Gertie. Okay, bye. Do 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 do.
Oh,
Anyone?
yes.
No, it's fine. Okay, sign me out with my song.
Okay.
There you go.
Oh, I think it's time for her to go home.
She's left her brassiere here again, DJ.
Oh, I'll just put it in the drawer with the other ones.
Well, DJ, let's give the reveal. What the hell is the shoe, the movie we're talking about tonight? Give us the lowdown.
Okay, folks, so grab your popcorn and your drink and sit down because we're going to talk about a classic. This movie was virtually forgotten. It's one of those films that Hollywood thought they lost, and it is The Old Dark House, the original from 1932.
Excellent. I got to tell you, DJ, this is one of my most favorite movies. I discovered it, I don't know, only 3 years ago when I happened to stumble across an original grimy print of it on YouTube. And I watched it and I was simultaneously shocked and amused by it. Whoa.
Yeah, it does take me back. I mean, one of the things that I've mentioned is that growing up, my dad had a great love of films, and I adored a lot of the classics. I mean, one of the reasons we were doing this show is because there's so many films these days that people don't know are actually remakes. And then oftentimes the original was the inspiration because it was just that darn good. And so, The Old Dark House from 1932 with Boris Karloff, and there is just a laundry list of up and coming people in this film here. So, normally, what we do from here is we go ahead and talk about what was going on in the world at the time of this movie, so you can kind of wrap your mind around, what was happening to those who were going to the theater when this came out. So,
Yeah, 1932. DJ, lay it on us.
okay, well, most notably, 1932 was the last year of the Great Depression. And as Hubby Billy noted, there was a fair amount of escapism. People wanted to get away from the everyday world. So they were going to the movies quite often because maybe their loved ones were, overseas, or maybe they'd lost their shirt in the stock market. And in 1932, among the things that happened was the first woman was elected to U.S. Senate. We also had the first daytime soap opera beginning on radio.
Wow.
Yes, and the son of Charles Lindbergh was kidnapped. So, those of you who've heard about the Lindbergh baby, that's what happened. This young couple with a pilot that traveled around the world in record time, his child was kidnapped in 1932.
That's right. Guess what, folks? Conspiracy theorists continue to talk about what really happened. And, anyways, that's a whole nother story.
The Dow Jones was at its slowest average since the Depression. Buck Rogers debuted on radio, and Radio City Music Hall opened in New York City. And that basically signaled the end of the vaudeville period, which is how this theater got its start. And
That's
some
right. And this, we're talking about the Marionette Theater where we're sitting in the chairs, which DJ, not all that comfortable, to be honest with you.
they had
These old chairs.
days. We might want to bring our own cushions like folks do that come to church.
Well, honestly, but anyways, go ahead.
So some of the important people that came into the world in 1932 included future U.S. Senator Ted Kennedy. We also had Hollywood celebrity and star Elizabeth Taylor, and the mother of everyone's favorite space princess, Carrie Fisher. Her mother was Debbie Reynolds.
Debbie Reynolds.
And
And guess what? Elizabeth Taylor and Debbie Reynolds had quite a history together. Let's just say there was no lost love between these two.
I can imagine back in the day, they probably had a boyfriend or two they fought over at least.
At least, DJ, what were the other films that were released in 1932? Give us a look at that.
Yes. So, as I was saying, 32 was the last year of the Depression, and there were a boatload of movies that came out that year. I mean, it's amazing. If you look this up, people, you will have a list a mile long. But the most notable ones included Grand Hotel, which starred the ever famous Greta Garbo, who's
Ooh.
said, "I want to be alone." We have Hell's House with Betty Davis, which I was confused about until I read a little about it. It's not like Hell House, it's Hell's House. It's about a foster home situation,
Uh-huh.
a very common theme in the days of the Depression.
Sort of
Uh,
like Little Orphan Annie.
yes, which is another movie that was released that year, which Little Orphan Annie, of course, got its star as a comic strip. It was also a radio serial, but in 1932, the first film with Little Orphan Annie was released.
That's right. Just to emphasize Little Orphan Annie, it was phenomenally popular. And as a daily and Sunday strip in the newspapers, it was a continued story that had like a plot going on every day, and it would continue and continue, as many of the comic strips did at the time. But Little Orphan Annie certainly captured a lot of love from a lot of people, and that's why we translate over into movies and radio.
And then there's just a handful of other films that came out that year that were of note. We have Madame Butterfly, which, in more recent years has had different versions made, but the original story starred Cary Grant in a very different tale than those you saw in later versions, but there was a fascination with the Far East at that time, and that was portrayed in this film. We also have another film with the star from tonight's program, Mr. Boris Karloff, in what was the original, The Mummy. So if you've seen the more recent years Brendan Fraser movie, The Mummy, this is the original, the true classic.
And I would say the best. There was a whole series of Universal movies that spawned from the original Boris Karloff movie, and there's a lot of nice things about all of them, but really, the original is probably the most heralded.
And the last film on the list for 1932 was another film that had its roots in the fascination with the Far East. It was a film with star Marlene Dietrich, who was very famous because during her heyday, the Nazi Party in Germany tried to recruit her to gain popularity with the people, and she said, "Nuh-uh, go away." But this movie was called Shanghai Express, and I, for one, am gonna try to track down a copy of this because it seems pretty fascinating. Long story not so short, basically, Marlene Dietrich has gained a name for herself in her travels, and she runs into an old boyfriend on the train who doesn't know she's going by a different name these days.
Hmm. Very interesting. I am not familiar with this movie, so I might want to catch this.
So,
Now,
Tommy,
yeah,
that's what was going on in the world in 1932, and we have a celebrated cast here. Did you want to let the listeners know some of the great people that are featured in tonight's film?
that's right. The Old Dark House has really just, I mean, when you think about it now, today, and you look back at this cast, you think, holy cow, these guys had long running careers that stretched right up to today. And first of all, uh, it starred the headliner was Boris Karloff, and this is coming right off of his premiere movie Frankenstein. And Boris Karloff, you got to understand before we get into the Old Dark House, the impact of Frankenstein. This movie really was, in every way, a blockbuster of its time. Nobody had seen anything like it. The makeup with Boris Karloff playing the monster frighten people in a way you don't understand, because nothing like this had ever been seen. This Frankenstein movie propelled Boris Karloff out of obscurity into a major star that everyone knew about because of Frankenstein. And this movie, The Old Dark House, was the next movie Karloff did. It happened to be with the same director and many of the same production crew from Universal that did Frankenstein. And you got to understand, Boris Karloff had been in Hollywood doing meager parts for years, and he didn't make a lot of money. And one of the reasons Boris looks so cadaverous in Frankenstein is that the guy was literally starving to death. He didn't have enough to eat. And so when you look at his gaunt face in Frankenstein, it's because the poor guy couldn't, I mean, he was just kind of starving. Anyways, this Frankenstein propelled Boris Karloff like nothing else. And when this movie, the next movie Karloff was in, The Old Dark House, there was the very first thing you see in the movie is a production note that says, "Hi, this is Boris Karloff that you're seeing here. It's the same guy that was in Frankenstein. We just wanted to make sure you knew." I'm paraphrasing, but that's what it meant, because Karloff was in such heavy makeup in Frankenstein. And here he is in the next movie, and the producers seem to feel like, oh my God, we got to make sure that this audience really knows that this is Karloff. And because Karloff had just become a sensation, and that's how important his name was all of a sudden. And so the first thing you see is a note from the producers that says, "Yep, this is Karloff, and he looks a lot different from Frankenstein, but yeah, this is Karloff." That's how important Boris Karloff had become before this movie was released.
You couldn't recognize him unless they told you who it was, but the poor guy, he only got to show a little bit more of his face in the role before it, and, he did have some speaking, although it was a little mumbled, but, more importantly, Mr. Boris Karloff not only had had at least a dozen acting roles before this, although, yes, they might have been supporting roles and bit parts, but later on, he would also become one of the founding members of the Screen Actors Guild.
Oh, so right, DJ. And that's a really important thing to note about Karloff, is that uh, that's where his mind was, and he really was part of a burgeoning desire by the actors to form a union, just say, there's certain things we're just not going to do. We're not going to work for 20 hours straight, and we're not going to blah, blah, blah. And Boris Karloff was right there at the very beginning.
And, some of the things that, you can read about Mr. Karloff was that as he was one of the founding members of the Screen Actors Guild, he didn't trust, the everyday man. He wanted to make sure that his business was conducted in confidence, so he used to carry around rolls of coins with him so that he could use payphone to conduct union business.
Uh, because you had to be a little bit secretive, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So some of the other people that were in this movie weren't quite as established as Mr. Karloff. Mr. Melvin Douglas, one of his co-stars, had only been in his sixth role, so one could say he's only had half the experience of Mr. Karloff. And he wouldn't even find his signature role for another 7 years. He starred in a film with Greta Garbo, and that's when people actually finally discovered, who's this guy Melvin Douglas?
That's absolutely true. And I'd like to point out here, Melvin Douglas. Melvin Douglas. Who was this guy? Well, there was a movie done, oh God, I think in the 80s, I think, and it was called Being There with Peter Sellers. Melvin Douglas played the rich old man in that movie. So modern audiences, might know him from that role, but his credits go all the way back, and here he is in 1932 as he's kind of the hero of this movie.
Yeah, we meet him fairly early on, and Toppy, there is a couple of more people in the cast here.
Yeah.
One of note, and if you attended our live show for the last episode, you would have heard Toppy mention that there is a lady who took a break from acting for a while. Who was that was in this film?
I think you're talking about Gloria Stewart.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and again, modern day audiences would know her from Titanic, directed by James Cameron. Gloria Stewart's that old woman who starts out in the beginning and she tells the whole story about the Titanic. That's her. And here she is back in 1932 as a young woman, and she's very pretty. And here she is. And you can see her, all those years later. It's just kind of fascinating just seeing her, because all I knew about her was seeing her in the Titanic. And when I saw this, it's like, wow, here's what she looked like all those years ago.
And what's interesting as we get into the movie is that her character, as she shows up in the setting of the movie, um, explains that she's a chorus girl, and
Yeah.
that actually, ideally could have been how Gloria Stewart might have gotten her start in the beginning of her career, was maybe as a chorus girl. So maybe not playing so much as a character as being herself on the set.
Well, maybe, but let me just make a slight correction, DJ, just a slight. This is, I can see why you easily confuse this, but uh, um, she was in the first scene of the movie as the wife of Philip.
Oh, she's
And
a couple.
yeah, the call girl who came in later um, is a different actress. So that's just to make
Oh,
that clear.
okay.
So it was. Anyways, let's get into the brief plot synopsis, which I could just say. Well, the old dark house, folks, set
And
the stage for everything that came after it. There's one movie, a silent movie called The Cat and the Canary, that maybe even had the tropes earlier in the silent movie days. But here in the old dark house, we've got all of the tropes for the next 100 years of haunted house movies. This movie started it all, which is another reason why you should see it. The plot is a bunch of stranded travelers, and they stumble upon a strange old house, and eventually they find themselves at the mercy of a highly eccentric and potentially dangerous family. That's just a brief synopsis.
and
There's
it
so
happens in the middle of a storm.
yeah. Keep that thunderstorm sound clip handy, DJ.
Shall I play it again?
Ha! Why not?
It was a dark and stormy night, and there was a young couple who was escaping to the countryside. And little did they know that they would be caught in a deluge, and the earth would just come tumbling down upon them, and they would find themselves before a dark old house. Oh, an old
DJ,
dark.
I just wonder if when you saw that the scene of the mudslide, did you see that as a model piece? It was a miniature that they did.
Yeah, it looked like it might have been stock footage, as they call it nowadays.
Well, it wasn't. It was done for that movie, but to accomplish the effect, it was a little remote controlled car, and it was a model, and the mudslide was slowed down a bit. It was one of the movie's only special effects uh, shots.
Yeah, and as you were saying, this establishes so many of the tropes that are in horror films to this day. I mean, up until the point where they meet the man of the house, um, this, sets the tone for so many things. I mean, it's like the first like 10 minutes of Rocky Horror Picture Show even.
Well, that's absolutely true because really the plot of the Rocky Horror Picture Show and the plot of the Old Dark House are kind of similar. People stranded going to a strange place and they meet strange people. That's the plot of both movies.
Yes, and until you actually get inside the house, and of course, in this story, in the old dark house, they don't quite ask to use the phone because I think from the side of the house, they know that they probably don't have a phone. Of course, this is also 1932, so they probably realize that folks in the country may not have a phone just yet.
Or it was always out, especially during a storm. Lights and the phone would go out.
And as they came into the household and they were greeted by the manservant, Mr. Morgan, we are greeted by the big name of this film, Mr. Boris Karloff. And so you're led to wonder who is this mysterious man that answers the door and lets him in. And of course, then the main head of the household comes out.
Harris,
Yes, Horace, the
which
brother.
which uh, uh, part of the wonderful characteristics of this movie is first of all the set. It's very gothic. It's very effective. And the first time we see Horace, he's coming down the staircase, and the camera tracks in lower than him. And the camera kind of looks up, and the actor has a really weird face. He's perfectly cast. He's got kind of I don't know, uh, a weird nose, and he's just very weird looking. And the camera tracks right in on him, and that we're in for something strange.
It's just very interesting because as somebody who grew up in America, and this story, it should be noted, is supposed to be set in the countryside. It's in England, and this young couple has found themselves in Wales. So it's supposed to be a little bit removed. It's off the beaten path, and it might be a little strange to most common people. And he starts speaking to the man, and he says something, and he's like, "Well, that doesn't sound like Welsh, even."
Yeah, there is a point. And well, the fact is, the people producing the movie knew damn well that nobody spoke like a Welsh person. And I think they threw that in there as just sort of a, I don't know what, just sort of a, hey, haha, it takes place in Welsh, but it's, nobody talks like that.
We couldn't afford a person who could actually speak Welsh, so we're just going to go ahead and pretend like the spaghetti westerns.
Kind of, sort of. One of the other actors who makes his Hollywood premiere is Charles Lawton, and he's kind of the only guy that speaks with anything that could be called a UK accent.
Oh yes, and he's supposed to be the atypical representation of culture because he arrives a little bit later when everyone's getting ready for dinner,
Right.
and you know,
He's the guy that arrives with the call girl you were thinking of.
oh yes, but more importantly, he's introduced as Sir William, and ironically, it's Porterhouse. Now,
Ha! Isn't that wonderful?
oh,
Listen, Charles Lawton went on, he did so many great roles, but here's his first Hollywood movie, and you gotta see the character that he creates for this movie. And it's wonderful. It's eccentric. And DJ, did you kind of think this guy is gay?
yeah, he was definitely a fancy man, as they might have said in the day. He had a sense of fashion with him, and You know, as you go into the film and you're learning about each of the characters, there's a point where the call girl is talking to the gentleman that arrives first there in the car,
Yeah,
uh,
Melvin Douglas.
Melvin Douglas, and she's explaining that, you know, the guy only likes her for her company. She doesn't really think he's interested.
Right. That's what I'm thinking of. You know, these are subtle things in the movie. The director, James Wales, who's a freaking weirdo. Anyways, by all accounts, but a very clever director, a very clever writer, very creative person. I have to believe that his vision here really is, and this is pre-code Hollywood, which means these sorts of innuendos were kind of allowed, whereas after the code, you would not see any of this. Frankly, this movie could not have been made pre-code because this movie is weird. The characters are weird, and it's not overstated, but yeah, Charles Lawton is this character that comes in with a woman, and we eventually find out that the relationship is very platonic. That and one concludes maybe because of the eccentric performance by Charles Lawton that maybe he's a gay man.
Yeah, because you know, he has a sense of style about him. He's actually dressed better than the others, and he cares about his clothes. He comes in and, you know, he seems to be straightening himself, dusting himself off, and here everybody has come in from the rain. They know that they've all been wrung out to dry.
You're kind of, you know what, DJ? I've forgotten. We've got some film clips. Why don't we play the first one, clip number one, which sort of is this actual clip is a compilation for a recently compiled Blu-ray edition of the movie. So this is not the original trailer for the movie, but it's for the newly released Blu-ray version. Can you play that, DJ?
And I have some local trivia I can add to that, so we'll go ahead and play it.
Do you happen to have any idea where we are? Let's look at a map or something.
My own view is we're not on a map.
Oh, look, Phil, lights, pull in there. Talk again, louder.
I should have thought that was loud enough to wake the dead.
Come on then, Morgan. Let them in.
I'm sorry to barge in on you like this, but needs must when the devil drives. You will have to stay here. The misfortune is yours.
He's alive! He's alive, I tell you.
You're afraid, aren't you?
You don't seem to understand. We may be cut off. But this is absurd. Did you hear that? What is it? Listen, there's a madman upstairs. Morgan's let him out and he's dangerous. We've got to do something.
He just wants to destroy, to kill.
That is for the Blu-ray edition. Folks, it's weird. The original placard for this movie that would show up in the theaters in a type that was larger than the title, larger than the type for the stars or anything, was one word, and it was weird. That was the word that the producers decided to put to advertise this movie. And the characters in this house, the old dark house, are all weird.
Absolutely. Now, a little bit of side trivia that I wanted to add was that the more recently released Blu-ray copy,
Yeah.
that, of course, a lot of times when an older film is released with a Blu-ray copy, it's because they've found an original negative of the actual film, so they can do a higher quality reproduction on it. Well, the Blu-ray of the Old Dark House that has just been sent out to the world was actually due in part to an effort. They got involved with the Rochester, New York George Eastman House, and of course,
Yes.
for those who don't know the great history of the Northeast, the Kodak Corporation was founded in Rochester, New York. George Eastman was the founder, and this is part of his estate. Film students in the Northeast, are well aware of the George Eastman House because not only is it a museum to the history of the company and the man himself, but it's also a celebration to the art of film because they have their own theater there. Because George Eastman was a well-to-do man in his day, and he actually had his own private theater, and it's open to the public. Well, you do pay an admission, but they show art films there, and the old dark house was restored, preserved, and brought to Blu-ray due in part to the George Eastman House.
uh, by the fact that they had a good quality negative.
Mhm.
So the George Eastman House, I used to live in Rochester, and frankly, one of the great features of Rochester, New York was the George Eastman House. And it saved because Eastman was so involved in film and photography that he saved so many negatives, and that's where they got the negative for this movie to recreate on the Blu-ray and make it this crystal clear, wonderful version. I have not seen it. I've had to settle with the YouTube version of a really old print. And that's what I'm used to. And I cannot wait for the day to see this restored version, which coincidentally, in the UK, in England, this film was a much greater success over there.
Yeah, I can imagine it has partly a draw too because the characters relate with the culture there, especially going to Wales for the weekend. The young
Yeah.
people there. Now, I should also note we don't often say where we find these things, but as we are talking sometimes about things that are hard to find, I just want to go ahead and mention that aside from YouTube, there may be a slightly better copy of this available through a service called Shudder, Shudder, like you shudder because you're frightened. It's
Okay.
it's a horror channel, and it's available to folks through various different platforms, including Roku. So it's a streaming service, and they let you sign up for a free trial. So the Old Dark House is available on Shudder if you want to see something maybe slightly prettier. But anyways, you were saying that the folks in this were, odd people, and that's certainly evident when you're introduced to the characters because they're getting ready for dinner, and you meet the brother and sister. Now, you would think that this is the big old house. This would be somewhere that there's a generation of family. There should be children. There should be grandkids, but it's just this older brother and sister.
Yeah,
And
who never married.
yeah, so they're basically spinsters, and you're left to wonder, what's wrong with these people? Why are they alone?
And the next clip I'm going to ask you to play starts to set this up because uh, Gloria Stewart in her character wants to get out of her wet clothes, and she asks the mistress of the house to take her somewhere where she can change clothes. And in this next clip, uh, the woman of the house starts to talk about a lot of stuff that's pretty weird. So why don't you play that clip? It's
Okay.
number 2.
Very kind of you to let us stay. What? I say you're very kind. Yes, it is a dreadful night. I'm a little dead. I understand. Yes. Now, Midge! I'll have none of this electric light. I won't have it. Thanks very much. I can manage quite well now.
My sister Rachel had this room once. She died when she was 21. She was a wicked one, handsome and wild as a hawk. All the young men used to follow her about, with her red lips and her big eyes and her white neck. But that didn't save her. She fell off her horse, hunting, hurt her spine. On this bed she lay, month after month. Many a time I sat here listening to her screaming. Oh, dreadful. She used to cry out to me to kill her, but I'd tell her to turn to the Lord. And she didn't. She was godless to the last.
Well, I'd better change my wet thing.
They were all godless here. They used to bring their women here, brazen, lolling creatures in silks and satins. They filled the house with laughter and sin, laughter and sin. If I ever went down among them, my own father and brothers, they would tell me to go away and pray. They wouldn't tell Rachel to go away and pray. And I prayed and left them with their lustful red and white women. My father's still alive. He's upstairs. He's very old.
Oh, is he?
He's 102.
It's very old, isn't it?
He's a wicked, blasphemous old man. You're wicked too. Young and handsome, silly and wicked. You think of nothing but your long, straight legs and your white body and how to please your man. You revel in the joys of fleshly love, don't you? That's fine stuff, but it'll rot. That's finer stuff still, but it'll rot too in time.
Don't! How dare you!
So creepy, creepy, creepy from the get-go. These groups of people that come in for shelter, they're confronted by these the man and mistress of the house, brother and sister, and they're fucking they're weird. They're just plain weird.
And what I thought was the strangest part was when the young lady asked to change her clothes. She goes to the trouble of telling her that it used to be her dead sister's bedroom.
Yeah.
And then she goes about the business of touching her. She's like, "Oh, well, that's
Yes.
nice. Like, that's gonna rot." And then she touches her skin and she says, "That's gonna rot too."
Yeah, that's what happens in the clip we just heard. She's fascinated by the expensive cloth of her dress, and then she touches the skin, and also, ew, ew, that's weird, man.
Go away.
Yeah. So
Yes, we meet the brother and sister, and then we find out that they're holding a secret. And of course, the first secret you heard in the clip there, she let the cat out of the bag. My father is still living. He's old, but we have him tucked away.
yeah, why don't we play that clip next? Because in this clip, two of the characters, Gloria Stewart and Melvin Douglas, come up and find in a secluded room an invalid, and it happens to be a 102-year-old man, the father of the woman who has greeted them all. And let's play that clip.
Who are you?
I'm Mrs. Waverton. This is my husband. Are you Sir Roderick Fenn? We came in because we thought we heard you calling. Can we get you anything? Can you take it yourself, or shall I give it to you?
I can take it myself, thank you. What was that noise? Was it Morgan?
Yes.
Morgan is a savage. I must apologize, but we have to keep him here. You shouldn't have come here.
I'm very sorry, but really we couldn't help it.
Oh, I don't mean that. I was never inhospitable. Never. This house was always filled with guests once upon a time. When you came, what did they tell you?
Why, they told us you were an invalid.
Was that all?
Yes.
You've seen my son Horace and his sister Rebecca
Yes.
and Morgan. I would like to tell you all about it, but there may not be time. You see, when you're as old as I am, at any minute you may just die.
Oh, please don't talk if it tires you.
This is an unlucky house. 2 of my children died when they were 20, and then other things happened. Madness came. We are all touched with it a little, you see, except me. At least I don't think I am.
Would you like to go to sleep now?
No, not just yet. You see, it may be
It may be what?
dangerous.
You mean Morgan?
No, not Morgan. I mean from my eldest son, Saul.
Saul?
They didn't tell you about Saul.
No, they didn't.
Saul is the worst, you know. We have to watch him because you see, he just wants to destroy, to kill. Poor Saul.
Where is he?
I know where he is. He's upstairs behind that bolted door, isn't he?
Yes, lock him. Saul is why we have to keep Morgan.
But if he did get out?
Saul quite certainly would set fire to the house.
So this is where we find out from this old man. By the way, DJ, when you saw this, were you confused like me whether this was a woman or a man? Because when I first saw this, I could not figure this the fuck out.
You know, they say that acting was the invention. Necessity is the mother of invention, and acting was the originator of gender bending. Because when you had roles in Shakespeare and whatever, they didn't always make sure that a man played a man's part or a woman played a woman's part. And this is one of those examples. They were looking for somebody who was so feebly old that they were bedridden. But I would tend to agree. I think that they did have a woman playing this role because you can't fake that sort of a tone in the voice. I think it was a woman. Now,
No, it was a woman, and she played the role because James Whale could not find a male actor that appeared old enough, and he had this woman who was old, and it just happened that way. But in spite of the voice and the weird, because this is the way it happened, you're hearing somebody who's supposed to be a man but sounds like a woman, and it just adds to the weirdness of the whole damn thing.
yes, and you have to admire the techniques too, because I mean nowadays, we've got an 8-foot screen in our living room, for example. You can see all the teeny details. And sure, clearly they may have just tacked on some tissue paper to her face to make it look aged. But for the time, that was pretty good makeup, I'm sure.
Yeah, I got to tell you, the visuals on this ancient 102 or whatever year old character is, well, creepy. First of all, the face is very fuzzy with fur, and it's just creepy as all get out.
So I think that we should mention that we were a few moments late getting started. We'll be a few moments over the top of the hour. We don't have anything on after us. But Toppy, I think that we should move forward and just briefly for a moment, hubby Billy in the chat room mentioned there was a remake later on. I think it was in 1963, don't you say?
It
It was,
and this is an excellent time to play this
clip.
and just make it part of our half hour into it, little break, and you guys listen to this, and we'll all. This means it's good time to go fill your glass, and we'll be back in about 3 minutes.
Are you interested in property? Desperately in need of somewhere to live or die? Then we have the very place for you. Femme Hall, they call this old dark house. Why don't you drop in? Sometime.
May I introduce a friend of Casper's, Mr. Pendrell?
Such a surprise to find he had a friend. We're having you for dinner. Delicious.
We should warn you that the Femme family have some very killing habits. But don't lose your patience, or you may lose your life. Living in the old dark house is Roderick, the eldest Femme. Then there's Cecily, the prettiest and youngest.
Something terrible is happening here. You've got to leave before the others find out.
The others? Who are the others? Well, there's Aunt Agatha, who loved knitting, surrounded by a host of wool-gathering relatives. Something or someone must have needled her.
Must have been murder. She always knitted so carefully.
This is Potiphar, and let's face it, he is plain potty.
There isn't much time left, Mr. Pendrell. There isn't much time.
Morgana, of course, is the femme fatale, one of the amenities of the house.
Don't you have any boyfriends?
I always have to be home by 12 o'clock. Well, things were just getting started, and I had to stop.
Also in the old dark house, you'll find Casper and Jasper. And dead or alive, they look the same.
You're there, and you're dead.
No, I'm not.
Yes,
Tom was just a visiting American who came by accident, and by accident, he was still alive. Remember, we are the sole agents for this desirable property, an exclusive residence that's murder to run. It will be vacant any moment now, on dead easy terms.
So there you go, folks. That was William Castle's version in 1963. And frankly, for a lot of years, that's the movie people remembered. When you said The Old Dark House, people had forgotten about the 32 original because it had been out of circulation for a long time. Universal Pictures, for television in the 50s, put out all of their movies, all of their Universal Monster movies in a package. But The Old Dark House, for whatever reason, was not included. And so The Old Dark House was never on TV. Just think of when you were a kid and Monster Movie Matinee, and they'd play Frankenstein, Dracula, everything, but not The Old Dark House. And it was considered lost, particularly when the 1963 movie came out. Some of the rights switched around, and the 1932 original was just in obscurity. Nobody knew about it. I certainly didn't. I never saw it until I found a damn copy of it on YouTube.
And what's interesting to note about the 1963 remake is that it added several new elements that weren't part of the original story. Like there was an inheritance and there was a will, but there were terms. You had to be home before midnight and you had to be at dinner. And um, one of the things that was interesting about it was it starred Tom Proston, who until years later wouldn't be more well known for his role on the Newhart show on Bob Newhart. So
That's right.
when you watch that, you're going to see a very familiar face in his younger years. But all in all, because it was a color movie, Boris Karloff didn't want to have anything to do with starring in it. So he made personal appearances to help promote it. And one other small side note was that the opening sequence for the 1963 remake starred the artistic talents of one Charles Adams, who created the Addams Family.
Oh, tell me more about that. What did he do for the movie?
Well, it was just a animated opening sequence, which was very popular at
Oh.
the time. A lot of Disney films used it,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
it featured brush strokes, and he signed his artwork in the opening sequence as Chaz Adams, which was how Charles Adams signed his name.
Okay.
There was to cross promote a little bit. There's a podcast called Stuff You Missed in History, and there were a couple of episodes recently about Charles Adams that were quite interesting.
Well, for people who don't know, Charles Adams was a cartoonist. He was famous for his cartoons in the New Yorker magazine, and his cartoons were about this family called the Addams Family. Well, guess what? In the 60s, late 60s, there was a TV show called The Addams Family. That TV show was based on the weird one-panel cartoons that would appear in the New Yorker. So that's what that holds. But I did not know that that Adams was part of any of the design of that 1963 movie, DJ.
I think he had very limited involvement. I think he did only just do the opening sequence, but he was a fan of Boris Karloff because his early films did inspire a lot of the art direction for some of Charles Adams' works, including the Addams Family. So he wanted to make a tribute to Boris, and he did that by agreeing to animate the opening sequence.
Awesome. Now I got to tell you, folks, I tried like hell to watch this 1963 version by William Castle, starring Tom Poston. DJ, I think you got a little further along with it, maybe even completed it, but I could not. But I swear to you, I will try again because it is nothing like the 1932 original. The 63 version was played more for laughs. They took liberties. It's really a thing unto itself. DJ, did you see the whole thing?
I saw 90% of it. It should be said that The Old Dark House, the original, is not actually a very long film, which for its time, it was a typical runtime, a little bit over an hour and 15 minutes or so. Pardon me. But this 1963 remake was just a touch longer. I think it was like an hour and 22 minutes, closer to the typical runtime of that time. But again, it introduced some elements that weren't part of the original, like the will and the inheritance. And there were twin brothers. Who knew? You have somebody who mysteriously dies in the beginning after they arrive, and you think, oh no, he's lost his friend. Well, wait a minute, there's someone that looks just like him, and they end up being twins. And the campiness just ensues there. There's a spinster daughter there who she has many boyfriends, many suitors, and she tries to dress nicely. And, she shows up to dinner looking like she's dressed for an evening out when everybody else just sticks to the house. But it's a fun film. The fact that it's in color probably detracts from the story of being old dark house, and that's one of the reasons Boris Karloff wouldn't be in it, because it was a little too campy. But Toppy, I think that we are getting close to the end of our hour. And if I'm not mistaken, when I came in, I think I saw some envelopes over there in the box office.
All right.
Gertie, could you go fetch those for us?
Sure, whatever. Fine. Yeah. Here you go.
Okay.
Have at 'em, TJ.
So, after our first couple of episodes, we got some listener interaction, and we want to take a moment to thank everybody for reaching out to us. So, firstly, I wanted to mention that after our last episode about Perry Mason aired, we had a message from Miss Kathy Bacon, a widely known listener of all podcasts, great. And she mentioned that her guests, no T in that, for last episode was the Dick Van Dyke Show. And she said that Toppy might understand what she meant by that. That Kathy Bacon is a card.
I don't know. I'm not sure how Dick Van Dyke might have fit in there. I don't know.
Now, over on our webpage at Matinee Minutiae, Minutiae, I think I'm going to be spelling that right often here, matineeminutiae.com, we had a comment that was left by a listener, and this happens to be a friend of mine from here in Oslo. We'll call him Nurse Polly, and he mentioned... He said, and this was in relation to our first episode, Queen of the Galaxy. He said, Yeppers, I did listen. Wasn't a fan of Barbarella or Jane Fonda, but yes, she was good in 9 to 5. And that mentioned of Star Trek. Well, it was a good episode. Good show. And then lastly, we have an email that I'd like to get to. And this happens to be from friend of the show and Lotzel co-star for Mr. Smelly here, Miss Brenda Boo of the Tinopas. So Brenda wrote in to us and she said, just listened to both of your episodes and I really enjoyed them. I love the details and trivia you came up with for both shows. Makes me want to do a show with you as a guest sometime.
All right.
And finishes by saying, good job jumping between the chat room and your prepared material. I look forward to your shows in the future. Love, Brenda. Well, thank you so much, Brenda, Nurse Polly, and Kathy Bacon. Of course, we're at matineeminutiae.com and listen to the end of the show for the rest of the credits here. So, Mr. Smelly, I had such a fun time here. Let's get out those coins here.
Yeah. Here we go.
Okay. And what do you have there, sir? You got that?
I got a capsule. I'll open it. Oh, there we go. There's a piece of paper in here. This is going to tell us what the hell. Oh, this is supposed to be a clean lyric, a clean show, and I keep swearing. I'm very sorry.
Not the F-bomb, but you're fine.
Okay. All right. So, anyways, our next little shoe on Matinee Minutiae. Here's the clues, kids. It's going to be a TV series. Yes, a TV series. Think late 1970s. It takes place in space. And I'm not talking about Buck Rogers. So that's the hint for our next journey on Matinee Minutiae. And we're going to spaz out and nerd out about this TV show. And you have a chance to possibly guess as to what it is. DJ, explain how in a couple of days, on Monday, for example, there'll be an opportunity for people to find out and spoil it for themselves, because some people may want to actually see what we're talking about. Some people may want to guess. So how does
Yes.
that work?
So Matinee Minutia works a little bit like Christmas morning. You can either wait to open your presents or you could take a little peek. Now, we gave you just a little bit of a peek just now, but if you really want to know and you want to play along, you want to know what we're watching for our next show, which coincidentally or incidentally is going to be on Friday, November 9th, right here on Univaz. We are going to place a hint for you on the Matinee Minutia website. Go to matineeminutia.com and click on the link that says next show. There you'll have a strip of paper that says what we're watching next, and it will share with you the details of what we just revealed. The 1970s TV series that's set in space, and it's not Buck Rogers. You look for the little rabbit in the magician's hat because we've had many acts here at the Marionette Theater, including magicians. And if you read the instructions, you can find out what you're getting on Christmas morning. You just highlight next to the little rabbit in the hat, and you'll find out what we're watching.
Absolutely. DJ, that's spectacular. We are at the very end of our show. Before we leave, I cannot not talk about, let's spend just a minute or two talking about the end of The Old Dark House. DJ, am I correct in understanding that you only just saw it recently?
Yes, I saw it in the last week or so.
Okay, listen, what I gotta know, when you saw that last part where the action kicks up and that maniacal old guy comes out and starts setting the damn place on fire, and poor Melvin Douglas has to stop him. Did that seem shocking to you? Because I gotta tell you, when I first watched this, when that part came around, for a 1932 movie, I was shocked. This scene has savagery like you wouldn't believe. At one point, the old guy is trying to bite Melvin Douglas's neck, for heaven's sakes. This is a savage fight. I just wonder, when I saw it, this bowled me over. Like the last 7 minutes of this movie just shocked the hell out of me.
I know that it's many decades apart and maybe possibly half a century, but it reminded me of a season cliffhanger of the TV soap opera Dallas. The brothers sitting in a fight, and one thing leads to another, and they end up knocking something over, and the whole house is going up in flames. And then you're left to wonder what happens until next season. But yeah, they're tumbling, and they've got a knife, and things are just getting set on fire.
They topple through the railings and fall from the second story to the first. And it's all happens very fast. But what I'm impressed by is just the energy that this whole thing just suddenly happens. And for about 4 minutes on screen, you see this incredible savage struggle that I just impressed the hell out of me. I couldn't believe it.
And what's interesting to note is it was noted in some of the trivia that, here we've got this fire that's being set by the maniac of the house who's been quietly hidden away, which is typical of the times until more modern times where we had better, medicine and understanding of mental health. People used to be tucked away in the basement or in the attic so that the general public wouldn't see when they would come to call. Well, you've got the lunatic, for lack of a better term, tucked away, and he's set free, and now he's the tiger on the prowl, and he's setting the place on fire. But nobody seems to notice the fact that he set the fire, and we forget about it. They have a fight, and it's like nobody put out the fire.
Ha! You are absolutely correct, TJ. That's sometimes mentioned as something they just kind of forgot to show in the movie. But seriously, this freaking house is on fire, and then it's not, and we never really know why or how the fire was put out.
We didn't start the fire, to quote Billy Joel.
There you go. Well, folks, I hope that what we've talked about here may inspire you to go look at a movie as old as 1932. Yeah, it's black and white. Yeah, maybe the copy is that you're seeing, the sound is staticky and whatever, but I hope you can stick around and see it and enjoy it. See it as a product of its time. See it as something that influenced the genre of horror, spooky haunted house movies for decades, and appreciate it for what it was, because that's how I see it. That's the magic of this old house. I sure hope that you try to see a version of it, the original version, hopefully.
Yes. So, for those of you who may have been late to the show, this episode will be available for download early in the week. Now, also, we have video available on YouTube. Now, typically, this is an audio only podcast, but from time to time, we may play it up with sets and or costume. So until the download's available, you can go to our YouTube channel. You just search for Matinee Minutia or click on the YouTube link on our webpage at matineeminutia.com. So I'm going to go ahead and play us out, dear sir.
All right, DJ, it was fun tonight. Our Halloween special. I loved it.
I had a great time too. So, you guys be careful there and check your candy before you eat it.
Please do. And everybody in the chat room, thanks for joining us. It's so good to see you, especially Tommy, and Kron was there. It's great.
Yes, and welcome, Crone, and hopefully this is the first of many such visits. Okay, I'm going to play us out. Thanks for tuning in to Matinee Minutia. Our show is live every other Friday night at 8 p.m. Eastern. Stop by univazpods.net, click the tower for streaming audio, and enter Discord for chat. Follow us on Twitter at Matinee Minutia. Have a comment, question, or a suggestion for a topic? Email us at matineeminutia@gmail.com. And of course, you can visit our website at matineeminutia.com.
I have a voice.
I have a voice.
You have a voice.
You have a voice.
We have a voice.
We have a voice.
Unique voices in podcasting.
univazpods.net. Okay, I am going to go ahead and release the stream.
Woo, woo,
woo. Stop recording, yes. And then I also have to remember to stop YouTube.
Woo, woo, woo.